a 145% tariff on China is still a monumental shift in US trade policy. And despite what some in the White House claim that the 90-day pause was part of the strategy all along, Trump himself seemed to admit that he did it in reaction to the markets panicking.
I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know? They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid.
Hold on. A little bit afraid is a massive understatement. People were freaking out about their 401ks. There were grandmas looking at their retirement plan and getting ready to open an OnlyFans to get through the next 5 years. And it wasn't just ordinary investors. One financial analyst wrote after talking to fund managers, a few have quietly wondered if the president might be insane. Which is fair. Everyone knows the right time to ask if someone might be insane is 5 months after you elect them president. Look, this week was incredibly stupid. But it's important to understand exactly how stupid it was, because we're not out of the woods yet. And the damage the president's already done to confidence in our economic system could have lasting repercussions. So tonight, let's talk about Trump and his tariffs. And let's start with the fact that none of this should have been a surprise. Not only did Trump bring up the idea of 10% universal tariffs repeatedly on the campaign trail, he's been obsessed with the idea of punishing other countries with tariffs for years now. In fact, when he touched off a trade war with China in his first term, we spent 21 minutes unpacking it, and the arguments hold up pretty well, although I clearly do not. As evidenced by a YouTube comment from this week, which said, "I thought this was a new episode until I noticed John's hair was darker and face looked younger," which is both hurtful and fair. But that piece featured this clip of Trump back in 2011, laying out his whole fantasy of how tariffs could work.
Somebody said, well, what would you do? What can you do? So easy. I drop a 25% tax on China. And you know, I said to somebody that it's really the messenger. The messenger is important. I could have one man say, we're going to tax you 25%. And I could say another, listen, you motherfuckers, we're going to tax you 25%.
Okay, putting aside how striking it is to hear the word motherfucker on C-SPAN, I kind of wish he just kept doing the voices there. You can have one guy say, listen motherfuckers, we're going to tax you 25%, and you can have an Australian guy say, oh you bloody dingo, we're going to tax you 25%, mate. Or you can have Bjork say, I would tax you 25 butterfly rainbow sneezes in happiness soup. There's all sorts of ways that you can do it, but the tariff is the important part. The point is, Trump has long believed that tariffs can fix our trade problems, and that's coupled with his insistence that trade is zero-sum, that if we buy more from another country than we are selling to them, we're somehow getting ripped off. But that is just not how it works, because we are getting things in return. As one Nobel-winning economist jokingly said, I run a chronic trade deficit with my barber, he never buys a damn thing from me, which is just a classic economist zinger. Nevertheless, Trump applied both those beliefs to his initial tariff plan, imposing massive penalties on countries indexed to the size of our trade imbalance, which led to some of the incredibly stupid calculations on Trump's chart, perhaps the dumbest of which was actually explained pretty well by Jim Cramer.
Let's go to the southern African nation of Lesotho, which had the misfortune of being one of the two most highly tariffed nations on Trump's list. They're being hit with a 50% duty on their exports to America. That happened because Lesotho only imported $2.8 million worth of U.S. goods last year, whereas we imported roughly $240 million worth of stuff from them. Now, the thing is, Lesotho's a really tiny country. Virtually everything we buy from them is either apparel or diamonds. But because it's a very poor country, they can't afford to buy much from us. So what happens now? To start, we're going to have to pay a lot more for any apparel or diamonds from Lesotho. Maybe we can replace the apparel with diamonds? I mean, that's a lot harder. And the only way for Lesotho to get out of this jam is by importing more stuff from America, which it can't do because it doesn't have any money. So the president has likely just made things more expensive for Americans and not really changed the behavior of our trading partners.
He's right. Shit. Jim Cramer was right. I think I'm going insane. And quick side note there, if you're thinking, hold on, did he say Lesotho's sitting on top of a load of diamonds but they still don't have any money? I know, but we don't have time. That's a different story that I'm sure we'll do one day. I'll put a post-it note on my computer and everything. And while Trump's temporarily paused those huge tariffs on Lesotho and others, it is worth asking, what exactly is his end game here? And it depends on who you ask. When the tariffs first came down, some in the White House insisted they'd be permanent trade barriers intended to raise revenue and bring jobs back home, while others claimed they were a scare tactic designed to help us negotiate more favorable deals. But those are two very different goals with different consequences for businesses and workers who badly need to know which to plan for. So let's take each scenario in turn. And let's start with the idea that these tariffs are designed to shut out foreign competition and ensure stuff gets made here. There are a few issues with that, starting with the fact that lots of things aren't produced in the US, sometimes because they simply can't be at any kind of commercial scale. Even Trump's Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, pictured here rocking a cunty little bob, seemed to understand that last month when he said this.
Certain products, if I put a tariff on a mango, right? We can't grow mangoes in America. We just can't grow a mango. If you put a tariff on a mango, the mango would be more expensive. So then that's just like another version of income tax.
How do you
Okay,
think
so
about...
when the idea is to not do that.
Right. The problem is, when the tariffs were announced, mangoes weren't exempted, so we did do that. And sometimes it feels like the best way to ensure Trump does something is to tell him not to do it. He's like a toddler, both because his brain is unable to grasp negations and also because he has a short torso, huge head, always looks like he's about to fall over and won't let anyone brush his hair. That same logic applies to other crops like coffee and bananas, but that is not all, because it's also not easy to make electronics here. Take the Nintendo Switch 2. The company paused pre-orders for it this week because they didn't know how it'd be affected, as this analyst explained.
They got to figure out what they're going to get charged. Do they charge 50% more? Do they charge double? Do they even ship them?
How much of this is made in the U.S.? None of it.
None of it.
That is a good point, but an even better delivery of it. I want that guy on hand to respond to all other situations. How much birthday cake is left in the break room? None of it. How much of the Severance goat plot did you actually understand? None of it. How much of Trump's trade briefing did he genuinely read? None of it. And if you think, well, hold on, why don't we just build a switch factory here? Well, when it comes to high-tech goods, key components have to be sourced from complex global supply chains. So it's not a matter of simply building a factory. There is a lot more to it.
How much would it cost them to start manufacturing switches here in the U.S.?
Tens of billions of dollars.
Billions? That's because of a supply chain that's been built over decades.
It would take 4 to 5 years to even build and get done a factory here in the U.S. And the reality is the assembly, the supply chain's in Asia. If you just build a factory here in the U.S., where are you getting all the parts from? Still in Asia.
Exactly. And some of those components are presumably about to be subjected to heavy tariffs. And quick side note, among the many things that I'm mad about right now is the fact that I have to spend time talking about how tariffs will impact the Switch instead of what I really want to talk about, which is that I only just learned the president of Nintendo in America is named Bowser. That man